Okay, so this is going to be my second clip. So let me carry on with the PEST approach, right? The political, economic, social, technological. Maybe a simple thesis would be, why do exactly the critics of what's going on in the United States like to call Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Bubbles Greenspan? Why do they give him that nickname? Because there's a lot of financial bubbles. Stock markets go up and then stock markets crash. They have bubbles, meaning they boom ridiculously high, and then everything comes crashing down afterwards. All the bubbles. Another one, of course, why did they call the current Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke the helicopter Bernanke? What's that all about? Another interesting character you might want to look into is a guy named Hank Paulson, who is the Secretary of the Treasury. He is an interesting character as well. So that might be something as well. So in other words, what you could do is research all the key people in the news, is what I'm trying to suggest there. A third one would be something like social, right, in our PEST analysis. So take, for instance, that TV show that I'm sure you all love, called The 70s Show. That 70s Show, right? And in it, if you recall, there's the father, Red Foreman, loses his job at the factory. So from a social perspective, you could ask yourself, what are the social responsibility issues for a business that fires its employees? So they say, sorry, game over, you're fired, bye-bye. Change the, give me your keys back, change the locks on the door, you're fired. Or does business have other responsibilities to employees who are laid off? Or you could look at it from the perspective of Red Foreman. Or write your thesis on the the implications of losing your job and all the stress and adjustment problems and retraining issues that Red would have, right? So you could look at it from that perspective as well. You just pick one and run with it. I also have here in my notes, taking factory shutdowns, right? You can take that from multiple perspectives, right? You can take it from the point of view of like the economic stuff, saying there's no longer demand for the product, or there's been some sort of, maybe we had a tariff that used to protect our business, but now the tariff is gone, so we've lost that protection. We've got lots of international competition, and try to look at a shutdown of factories and businesses, loss of jobs from that perspective. Or maybe you want to take more of a Michael Moore perspective and kind of go out and interview some people. There's no law that says you can't go talk to people, interview them. Just don't break any laws in the process of doing that. But you can go talk to people. There's no reason to have that kind of investigative, digging up the dirt kind of approach, and that's fine. Let's see. Okay, for technological, take for instance the Simpsons movie, right? In which Springfield, of course, is cordoned off from the rest of the world, right, by the EPA, and put in the big dome, right? It's like Bubble Boy from Seinfeld. And remember, and there's one scene in it when when Lisa is making a phone call, and they have this like big gigantic room where the government is listening to everyone's phone calls, right? And then the government inspector guy goes, we got one, kind of thing. When they overhear Lisa's conversation about, we're fugitives and we better, keep low and so on. And they're all happy about that. Well, right off the bat, that raises a whole bunch of issues about privacy. You could say something about employee privacy. What kind of privacy do employees have at work? What privacy, from being monitored, right? Having their, the bosses, watching everything you do, how you use computers at work, and so on. I guess you could look at that from a technological perspective. In the Appendix A, they talk about intellectual capital and intellectual property protection. Well, I mean, we'll have, a lot of what business is based on is trade secrets, right? You invent the formula for Coca-Cola, you don't want the whole world to know that. But if governments are just running around spying on everything, and everything is tapped, and everything's being listened to, and everything's being watched, and everything's being monitored, then how do you keep everything secret at your company? Right? If your competitive advantage for your company is based upon secrets and everything's being spied on, then doesn't this sort of jeopardize possibly the competitive advantages of companies? Or what should companies do to keep their secrets secret? Right? It's so easy just to say, here's a file and copy it and there you go. Corporate espionage is so easy, right? You could just, I have the file, I hate my company, so now I'm going to just spill the beans. File click or whatever, So who knows? Maybe I'll log in with someone else's password or something, and they'll trace it back to them, and So how do companies keep all their stuff private? It's a very legitimate question, which is really more in the later sections of what I'm covering, like chapter 11, chapter 12, chapter 13. Right? So you can look into all of that. The secrecy and spying and tracking and monitoring and all this kind of stuff. Perfectly relevant as long as you spin it into something that your textbook covers. So I'm trying to spin it as a legal issue, as a trade protection secrets type issue, a corporate espionage issue, something like that. Right? I mean, of course, you could also approach that from a perspective of a sort of a constitutional perspective, right? If you're, let's say, a media company, and you want to publish the news, then what are all these things like free speech zones we see in the United States, and they have protests and so on? What does that message mean? That you're not allowed to just openly protest and assemble peacefully, but we have to sort of cordon you off into some little back room or something, or put you in some cage. What does that say to the freedom of thought? What does that say to your reporters who are writing for your newspaper or writing for your journal? Are they now in jeopardy if they write something a little bit too controversial? They're going to get thrown in some prison, or they're going to get marginalized, or they're going to get shut down, right? So we have to be very careful about about how much we restrict the freedom of speech. So that could be another topic. You look at it from a civil libertarian perspective, and the freedom of the press, which has, of course, big political implications as well, since the whole democracy is founded upon the fact that information should be freely available, not kept secret in some back room where only a few people know about it, and no one else is allowed to know. Right, so that's not really democracy. Alright, so that's that. I mean, you can have fun with that. Okay, so let me go through the chapters briefly. I just wrote comments very quickly. Actually, I'm going to start clip number 3, because it's, what the hell, why not?